For 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Bienvenue, Ministre. Thank you for coming. I believe it's our first time at committee together. When were you first made aware of the privacy breach that was reported in the CBC just a couple weeks ago?
Okay. Well, as you know, I can't speak of any specific occurrence. Mais ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que bon.
But what I can say is that as soon as I got to the agency in July last year, I had a comprehensive briefing on all potential fraud cases and the cases that were under investigation at the time. And every time after that point onwards, every time there was a somewhat important investigation, I was informed of the situation.
You were informed of fraud when you arrived at the CRA, when you received your first briefing, is that correct?
I had a general briefing on the different possibilities and on the past history.
But as it relates to the specific privacy breach that was reported with connection with H&R Block, when were you made aware of that case or those cases?
Vous savez.
Well, I'm sure that you know full well, Mr. Chambers, because of the Section 241 on the Income Tax Act. I cannot talk about specific cases.
Minister, I'm very familiar with Section 241. You're not talking about an in particular taxpayer at the moment. We're asking for when were you made aware? There is a briefing note, a memo, that has the sentence in it. Consensus is that gaps pose major risks to the agencies. Where there are internal funding, human resource considerations, all agree that visibility is needed. Do you recall receiving that memo?
Je reçois plusieurs mémos. Je suis briefée de différents.
I receive many memos, and I'm verbally briefed and in writing in different ways, so that doesn't surprise me.
To shed some light, this memo. Do you recall the memo that I'm referring to? This was reported in the CBC.
No, I do not.
No, you do not. Okay.
No, I do not. And I would just echo what the minister said. That
I have very limited time, Commissioner. I appreciate it. So, Minister, your testimony is that you cannot tell Canadians when you learned of a serious privacy breach that was reported in the news.
Je suis informée.
I am rapidly informed when the agency identifies a potential fraud case.
To be fair to say, if you're rapidly informed when the breach occurred, you likely would have been informed shortly thereafter, correct?
Absolument. Quand il y a une breach.
Absolutely. When there's a breach, a significant breach, I am quickly informed.
So why was that breach not reported to the public as a material breach when you learned of it shortly after it occurred?
Alors, la façon dont on fonctionne à l'agence.
Well, the way they work at the agency is that as soon as there's doubt, there's identity theft. First off, they block the account, and we communicate with the individual or the individuals or the company that is concerned. So we inform that person directly. So it's only in cases where there is something that's more generalized. For instance, during COVID, we would go ahead with an at-large communication, but it's usually the person and the person's concerns. They were immediately informed.
Thousands of taxpayers affected. If this breach occurred outside of government, there are obligations for those organizations to publicly inform or inform the public. Why is it that this breach was not publicized, but worse, withheld from the Privacy Commissioner until after the deadline passed for him to include it in his report in 2024?
Je peux vous dire que déjà dans le.
Well, I can tell you that in the general report of the auditor for 2022, we had already started revealing or transferring this information, providing this information, because yes, today you're talking to me about a block of 31,000 identity theft cases, but this has happened across multiple years, many years. And if you go back to the Auditor General's report from 2022, you would see that there are already 23,000 cases that have been made public.
If the process at CRA works really well in that the minister is informed relatively shortly after you're made aware of privacy breaches that happened over multiple years, it's reasonable to assume that you or your predecessor were made aware of these privacy breaches well before the March deadline that the Privacy Commissioner needs in order to include these privacy breaches in their annual report to Parliament. Why was it that these privacy breaches were reported to the Privacy Commissioner after the deadline when your own testimony suggests that you would have been made aware of these privacy breaches well before the deadline to report these to the public?
Donc, moi, je suis informée rapidement.
Well, I'm quickly informed when there are attempts at identity theft, and then we need to validate. And to do that, we inform the individual or the individuals quickly, and then we report the situation. And as I said, we had already started reporting the situation in the AG report from 2022.
There have been very few breaches at the CRA because he was not made aware of them to include in his report in 2024. So the timeline just doesn't quite work for me at this moment, but I believe I've expired my time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chambers. Next, we're going to go to our friend from Chateauguay-Lacolle. Ms. Shanahan, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chateauguay-Lacolle.
Thank you, Chair. Chateauguay-Lacolle, but soon the name of the circumscription is going to change. Minister, thank you for being here with us today. And for people who might not know, I worked for a long while in this field in terms of preparing taxes, and of course, it's very important for Canadians to be well informed and supported in their tax declarations. Tax returns, rather. And when I started, everything was in paper. Maybe Rene also remembers those days. We would have our two papers, one for Quebec, one for Canada, and we would fill out both returns, and then we would harmonize the two. But in the meantime, of course, software has now become available, and data is now automatically available, and you go onto a website and you can access your confidential information to verify things. So I try to let people know as much as I can. While those sources are for you to verify things, because there can always be issues and mistakes. Minister, what do you think is the best way for Canadians to make sure that their tax returns are done in the correct manner? Well, thank you, Ms. Shanahan. There is a lot of communication coming out of the agency on that, but the first recommendation will be to make sure that you're not using always the same username and password, because that makes you extremely vulnerable when you have very easy to guess passwords. If a scammer gains access to one of your passwords, then and be it at your bank or the password you use for the agency or other passwords, that's the first thing. And at the agency, we have a whole communication strategy on our website, and we provide information in other ways as well. We have education tools available to people so that they can protect themselves. I think we might call that financial hygiene or literacy. That's extremely important because as we speak, identity theft is a big issue, and almost all of these identity theft situations occur outside the agency. And it might be hard to remember this every single time, but it's usually people who have found people's username and password outside the agency somewhere, and that's how they get into the agency systems. Well, thank you for providing this information. And you referred to these cases of identity theft. And last year, I was at the Public Accounts Committee when we had witnesses appearing, and I think Mr. Hamilton also appeared at the time. And it was the AG, the Auditor General, who had done some analysis and shared the results with the public. We were talking about 20,000 cases or so. And we need to also be careful about the timing because tax returns are filled out 3 or 4 months after the fiscal year ends, because we have from January 1st to 31st of December, that's the fiscal year. And then people, taxpayers, have a certain period of preparing their tax returns. And then it might also take some additional time, sometime after that, for the agency to detect some situations. So I'd like to hear you on that too. But I want to underline one more thing. According to the Auditor General, the measures taken by the agency at the time were satisfactory. So do you think the same way? Today, are you satisfied with the measures taken by the agency? The agency has introduced many systems to protect taxpayers. We are partnering with many institutions in Canada, but also internationally. So when there is an incident, we immediately share information amongst ourselves, and we share techniques to prevent similar occurrences, and we add additional layers of safety, because if one layer fails, then there's another layer beneath that to catch that situation. So we have multi-factor authentication, and every single time you change information in your My account, it might be your address, it might be your banking information especially, you immediately receive an email. So if you receive an email saying, well, your banking information has been changed in your My account, and if you haven't done that, you have to call immediately the hotline so that your account can be blocked. So we have introduced many security measures to prevent these situations, but scammers are creative, but we need to also be creative, and we have a team that's keeping a close eye on that to make sure that we're protecting people with a new strategy. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. And next up, we have Mr. Villemure for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for being with us today. Well, I have many questions for you, but you said that, well, it's often the user's responsibility to change their password, etc. But digital platforms and systems can be complicated, and here we're talking about trust in an agency such as the CRA. And today, I think we have come across a problem in the reasoning, in the logic of things. I mean, is there not a way of taking the burden off the shoulders of the users? Well, I think it's shared responsibility. We need to make sure, for instance, when we're driving, we have to put on our seat belts. So everyone has an individual role and responsibility to play. But of course, we are deploying a lot of effort, spending a lot of energy and resources at the agency to prevent these cases of identity theft. And in this recent case, the information was obtained outside the agency's systems. So that's how scammers were able to gain access. So the agency has, again, introduced many measures. For instance, you may have experienced this yourselves. You go into My account, and then you're asked to click on the square where there's an image of bicycle, for instance. That is just to make sure that there's a human and not a machine on the other end. Or you, for instance, receive a code on your cell phone. Well, how many employees are there at the agency? Well, about 60,000. Well, in the 60,000, how many people are supervising at the first level? I would turn to the Commissioner to answer that question. I don't know the exact number, but supervisors at the first level, I will need to go back, and when you say at the first level, maybe about 400 executives, but there's another layer of employees, but I'll find you the number. Well, I would also like to know the following. With whistleblowers, there's usually a reaction that comes up. And what do you think about what has happened with the whistleblowing situation? Well, I believe that some situations need to be shared with the public via whistleblowers. That is why we support the legislation on that. But the agency, of course, is a prime target, and there's a lot of personal information stored at the agency, and we are governed by the Income Tax Act, especially Section 241. So there are a lot of measures. There's a code of ethics, and we have to be mindful, and every employee is responsible for protecting the integrity of the fiscal system. And clearly, we must not compromise investigations. But in this group of 60,000 employees, how many are working from home or working remotely? As we speak, we have a rule that says they need to be in the office 3 days a week. But there are some employees who have exemptions, but the general rule is that they need to be in the office 3 days a week. But there are others who have to work from the office 5 days per week because of the positions they hold. Well, has a majority of these employees been hired since the pandemic? Well, before the pandemic, we had 43,000 employees. At the height of the pandemic, we had 62,000, and today we have about 50,000 employees. So some employees maybe have not even known the agency before the pandemic. So there's a company culture, there's an institutional culture, right? That's the case everywhere. So remote work might have an impact on adopting this culture at the agency. So I just want to know if there has been sufficient supervision, given that some employees were never at the place of work. Well, when you say supervision, at what level? Because we have found different ways of working, especially during COVID. And I can reassure you that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that we are protecting the integrity. Of course, employees have very specific levels of access. But whistleblowers seem to think that nothing has been done on this case. Well, we have more than 60,000 employees, and not everyone is aware of all the work that the different teams and security teams and the others they liaise with are doing to improve the system. And I have a bit of an issue with the use of the term whistleblower in this situation, because the information that's been publicly shared with media outlets was already public information in different reports from the AG, or it was contained within the testimony before the Finance Committee or the Public Accounts Committee. So we did not learn anything new in the newspapers. So this information was available to parliamentarians and others. Well, I will ask additional questions in the next round. Thank you, Mr. Villemure.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Minister, I have to state right off the top, I found your responses to Mr. Chambers highly evasive. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to reply on the Nixon test. I'm going to start with just an agreed statement of facts that you've raised. You stated that the AG reported in 2022 that 23,000 accounts had been breached. Is that correct?
Yes.
You took office in 2023. Is that correct? You became a minister of this
Yes.
in 2023?
Yes.
And in that transition, you would have been updated on the breaches in 2022, correct?
Yes.
And you would have been aware that some $190 million in scams and due to hacking came from losses that went as far back in 2020. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Reasonable.
So we now know that in July, 31,000 accounts have been breached, correct?
Yeah, it's reasonable to, yeah.
Okay. So in that space, at what time did you know that the 31,000 accounts had been breached? Was that back in July of 2024?
I can't be that specific.
Why?
I can tell you, because I don't recall every briefing I've got in the last year.
This is a significant breach. Like,
I know, but you're asking me specific numbers.
Respectfully, Minister, we're talking about a material breach of thousands of people, hundreds of millions of dollars in your department
So this is the end of our first round of questions. Second round of questions. We are going to start with Mr. Berthold for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bibo, hello. In your opening remarks, Minister, you used government language. It's a beautiful, well-prepared speech without many details about what happened and the extent of it. And unfortunately, you did not really dwell on the impacts for citizens, because we're talking about 31,000 breaches in 2020, 2021, and 62,000 taxpayers seem to have been impacted. Have you been able to take care of all of those files? Well, the first thing I can reassure you of is that as soon as we have doubt that the individual is immediately informed. Well, you've already said that, Minister, but on of these cases, how many people are still waiting for their situations to be rectified? Have you been able to rectify all of these situations? Well, I would need to turn to my team on that, but there are different levels of breach. In some cases, the scammer, for instance, may have achieved, for instance, access, but without really penetrating deep. While in cases of fraud where money was paid out, where people are being investigated, and when they're under investigation, no additional transactions are possible. I have 2 cases before me. I cannot, of course, say the names, but there is a complaint received on the 28th of April, 2023, and it took it took 2 years for this individual's case to be rectified. I have another case before me, which was reported on 20th of May, 2020, and it was taken care of 8th of October, 2024. So, Minister, when you read articles like this, when you read information like this, are you not personally touched or are impacted by this? Of course I am, because each case is important. That much is clear, but there are different levels. But I'm talking about what you do, not what the agency does. When you see this, do you call the agency and tell them to take care of these situations quickly, or do you go, well, I'll wait and listen to the next briefing and we'll see, yes, this is not good, it's leaking into the media, so I'll go after the whistleblowers because this shouldn't be publicly available, this information. No, that's not what we do. But for people who are still waiting for their cases to be resolved, who are out of money, what do you have to say to them? Well, we have a big team working on this, and what I'm trying to tell you is that there are different levels of penetration or breach into the clients, into the individual's account. There are some cases that are quickly resolved. Some others are a bit more complicated and it takes more time. So we are here to help people, and we have protection systems that are in place. We are working with TransUnion to protect them too. Well, these cases should be resolved much more quickly because we're talking about people and families who don't have access to their money, who might not be able to buy food. So there are horrible numbers of people who are still waiting for a solution to their situation. And what we're hearing from you is that we're doing our best. There are different levels. Again, once again, government language. But, Minister, you are responsible for the agency. Would you not want to shake things up a bit and tell them, hey, you have to resolve these cases in 2 months so that these people can carry on with their lives? Well, we can give you much more detailed examples, and you would see that we are trying to go as fast as possible, and it's not always dependent on what's available internally to the agency. There are some checks and controls that go beyond the agency, and we have to work in partnership with others when we don't have all the levers. Are there criminal complaints that have been filed to law enforcement services, agencies, in relation to these frauds? Is this a criminal organized network that we're looking at? Well, there are different types of attack that could be directed at the agency, but have there been complaints to law enforcement agencies? Well, we've had all kinds of cases, but how many law enforcement cases are there that are still pending or investigations that are going on? Well, this is on another file. I wouldn't be able to tell you how many investigations we have. Mr. Hamilton, would you be able to answer this question?
for sure, but what I can tell you is that when we look at these cases, and if we see there's a possibility of criminal activity, we have our own criminal investigators, and we can also refer them to the law enforcement authorities.
Combien ont été référés, Monsieur le Président? Peut-être que le
Just,
ministre
if you
pourrait...
How many have been referred to law enforcement, though?
It's very clear. How many have you sent to the police?
Yeah, how many, I would have to
Okay.
consult with my team about exactly how many, and we may even have to get back to you on that. But we do have the ability to do that. And that also applies not just
Okay,
in
that's
fraudulent
enough.
cases like this, but also in tax evasion cases where we might see criminal
Okay, thank you.
activity.
Oh,
Non,
think I
non,
thought
on n'a pas de
first.
temps pour cette round. Other 5 minutes online, go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing before the committee today. Before I begin with my questions for the Minister, I have a couple questions for Mr. Hamilton.
On the 31,000 cases that keeps getting cited, this was not just one breach. This was a series of different smaller breaches, correct?
Yes, that's right. It was of a similar type of breach in many cases, but yes, it was a bunch of breaches.
And these were third-party breaches, correct? These were not breaches of the CRA's own system. These were breaches of third-party systems linked to CRA, correct?
Yes, if you take a stylized example, it would be where somebody gets information from another third party outside, maybe a financial institution. That information is sold on the dark web or however, and then people use that information, that password or identifier, to try to break into the CRA system. And we saw instances of that during the pandemic when there was significant amounts of money at play. And actually that caused us to really ramp up our activities in the fraud space beyond what we had before the pandemic.
Thank you. I'm just trying to clarify things that have come up in some previous rounds to give you a chance to explain. There was a number of questions from Mr. Green about the timing of when you became aware of these breaches. And because there's a number of different breaches, you became aware of them, no doubt, at different times. So I'm not trying to ask for a specific date. Because I think that's where you were getting caught up. You were trying to think, did you hear about it on February 14th or February 27th or March? Can you remember around the period that you became aware of the different breaches?
Of all the way along, I would say there was a big event in about August of 2020 when we uncovered that there was a lot happening, and we saw some vectors coming in, so knew about that, and that was a big number. And then since then, we've seen some of those types, but we've also seen other types of cases where people have not necessarily come in and tried to get served money or what have you, but they're using the speed with which we give out refunds, et cetera, to try to create false returns and get refunds. So it's a different kind of a fraud, but we did see those coming up. And so that's a continuum. It doesn't happen all on one day. It happens as you go. And so I would honestly have to say I don't know the specific dates of when it went from 23 to 25 to something else, but perhaps some of my colleagues
because
do,
it was happening. No, but I understand. But I think this is because it was happening over rolling periods because there were different breaches. So you don't have one specific date that you can just remember offhand because you were probably briefed a number of different times about breaches.
Yes.
Correct?
No, that's exactly right. And they continue where people are at least trying to attack us. I think we're getting better and better at resisting those. And I think the other thing that we pay a lot of attention to is when we know about it, we block the account, we take action, and then we pay attention to the individual. We try to resolve them as quickly as we can. I know earlier we talked about there are some delays. It's a big backlog coming out of the pandemic, and we spend a lot of our effort just trying to focus on protecting that individual's account, giving them credit protection where it's warranted. And then, as we can work through it, solve the case and see exactly what happened and what needs to be done to remedy it. I'd like to be able to move even faster. We are moving faster now, but we are still dealing with many cases that came up in the early 2020s.
Thank you very much. Et Madame la Ministre, je connais que vous êtes quelqu'un qui a...
Minister, you're very hands-on. I know that, and that is not something new. when you assumed your role, you were briefed and you were told that there was an important situation going on, right? Well, you know me very well, Mr. Housefather, indeed, and if you'll allow me, I have the answer to the question by Mr. Berthold. 135 charges laid, 25 million issue in fines, and a total of 108 years of prison sentences and 44 millions of federal taxes. I don't have my glasses, but these would be the results of the past five years from 2019 to 2024. Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Mr. Chair, do I still have time? 3 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Monsieur Villemure pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Villemure, for 2.5 minutes, please. Well, there seems to be a culture of secrecy at the agency rather than a culture of transparency. How many cases of snooping has there been? Well, in terms of attempts from employees, well, I can reassure you that that is surveilled very, very closely. There are mechanisms and systems that allow us to know if an employee is doing something of that sort. Even if you look at your own file, it's 5 days of suspension. It's really taken very seriously. I'm sure that's the case, but there's still 3,000 cases of that per year. Well, there is a scale of sanctions, and it might remain within our HR department, but we take it very seriously. But if last year I tell you that there were 3,000 such cases, does that surprise you? Well, I don't know. Well, whistleblowers, often they do it out of despair because supervision doesn't work. There's something else in the institution that doesn't work. Why do you think whistleblowers take action? Well, once again, I have a bit of an issue with the use of the term. Well, outside of our current context, because we've had similar cases before at the agency, why do they take action, in your opinion? Well, possibly because they think the organization could act in a different way. Well, in general, per year, how many whistleblowing cases do you have? Well, once again, what are you referring to? Well, whistleblowers who talk to media outlets or employees who talk to the Commissioner of Integrity or who communicate with the outside world? Well, I wouldn't be able to provide a specific answer. Would it be 100 or 1,000? I would be surprised if it's 1,000. Well, it's not the first time for the agency to be facing cases of breach or fraud. Well, I would like to provide some perspective. When we talk about fraud, identity theft, I'll give you some dollar amounts. We had a peak of identity theft during COVID because of the benefits and the programs that were introduced. So that was the worst year. Nothing else compares in 2021. But there has been fraud in the past. Yes, there has always been fraud. But last year, in terms of identity theft, we're looking at $3 million. But it was $59 billion. So $3 million, $59 billion.
Mr. Green, I'm going to give you an equal amount of time of 3 minutes on
Thank
this
you.
round because Mr. Villemure just had it. Go
I
ahead.
appreciate the equity, sir. Minister, are you currently investigating whistleblowers within the CRA?
On n'est pas en train de faire une...
We're not investigating our employees. We're just reminding our employees what their obligations are. And that is as per Section 241.
In a CBC story, you wouldn't deny the fact that you were going through the use of computers to see who is accessing what files and for what. Are you currently investigating whistleblowers within the CRA?
Can I talk, when you talk about whistleblowers,
People
say-
who presented information to the public.
in the public domain, we will always investigate if somebody does something inappropriate relative to our code of ethics or their duty of loyalty to us. So, for example, when we found that there were a bunch of employees that had claimed CERB,
Sure.
that was inappropriate.
Are you currently investigating the whistleblowers that resulted in the story with the Fifth Estate?
We are currently looking at all sorts of things that go on in the
I'm asking you
agency.
for
Yeah.
a direct answer, sir. Could you please provide the committee with a direct answer one more time? Are you investigating the whistleblowers that resulted in the story
We are
of the
looking to
Fifth Estate?
determine how, if information was true and how it got into the
Will
public
there, will
domain.
there be retribution, and if so, what will it be for the whistleblowers who went
I
public?
have no idea at this stage.
You
'cause
have
we
no
don't know.
policies for this, sir?
We do have policies, but
What are the
I think as
policies?
was indicated, it can go from minor discipline, a verbal reprimand, a written one, all the way up to termination. So it depends on the severity of what happened, and we have strict policies about that. So when something bad happens, to have maybe take the CERB case again, there were people that were
Well, we're
fired.
talking with specificity of the Fifth Estate. So for the people who are watching, and particularly those who, for the public interest, shared information with the public, perhaps they felt that their loyalty was to the Canadian taxpayer to make sure they had the right information and not to a bureaucracy or a government per se. What do you say to those people who are watching here today?
I say we take very seriously our responsibility in that regard to be honest, truthful, and protect the Canadian public. But we also have to protect the information that's within the agency, because
Information or
my
embarrassment?
information, we can't allow
Information
people
or
to-
embarrassment? Because it's not
information.
It's not desegregated information. It's not like they're talking about my receipts. They're talking about a huge breach that resulted in 31,000 cases of fraud. So that's not material privacy breaches of individual files. That is a systematic and structural failure within the agency to figure out what was going on with these third parties. They obviously felt like it wasn't being addressed, so they went public. So that, to me, as an MP, quite frankly, I feel like we had a duty to know as well.
Okay, Mr.
We
Green.
also did not have the opportunity to know until we found out
Okay,
the media.
that's the 3 minutes. You'll have a chance,
It's- sorry
Mr.
about that,
Hamilton, in the second hour.
I'll let you answer when we
I'm,
come back on the next
I'm almost
round.
certain we're
I'll give you
probably
that.
going to revisit this. Mr. Chambers, you have 5 minutes, and then we're going to finish this off with Mr. Baines for 5. Go
Thank you,
ahead.
Mr. Chair. Minister, you testified earlier that you have zero tolerance for fraud in all its forms at the CRA. How much fraud, what's been the loss to taxpayers from all forms of fraud at the CRA, say, last year?
Last year, it's about 2 million, and this year, as of now, 3 million.
Sorry, fraud in all its forms?
In identity, dans les vols d'identité,
In identity theft.
For all types of fraud, GST carousel schemes, you said zero tolerance for fraud in all its forms. I'm asking for a number on how much fraud has been, perpetrated against the Canadian taxpayer.
quand on dit qu'on a zéro tolérance,
When we say we have zero tolerance, it means we have a strong team and systems and tools.
Is that the testimony? You don't have a number?
à chaque fois qu'il y en a une, on
Well, every single time there is a case, we hit back and we introduce all the measures so that those situations don't keep happening. That's what I mean when I say we have zero tolerance.
With respect to the identity fraud, just one more question on this matter. Since it was a significant number of instances, a sophisticated operation, no doubt, did you report this to the RCMP? Have they been engaged to, potentially consider links to organized crime, maybe an inside individual within the CRA that would be potentially aiding and abetting these kinds of schemes? Have you engaged the RCMP on the identity fraud cases?
donc le 31 000 cas dont on parle,
So the 31,000 cases that we keep referring to, there are multiple cases. There are groups of different situations in that. For instance, there is a denial of service attack, but there are also multiple individual attacks. So there are investigations that are going on, and we have an internal criminal investigations team that is also working on files. So there are different levels of investigations that are going on.
But your criminal investigations team is not the RCMP. So the question still remains, have any of these identity theft cases, especially those with respect to the third parties' breaches, have they been referred to the RCMP, or are you asking for help from the RCMP to help you?
Dans certains cas, certainement, parce que
In some cases, definitely, because as I was saying, in the last 5 years,
That's a yes. You have asked the RCMP for help?
certainement, parce qu'on a des condamnations.
sure, because charges have been laid. 135 charges have been laid in the last 5 years. So that means it comes from the police.
Breaches and the issue with the H&R Block, you have engaged the support of the RCMP?
Si vous voulez me référer à un...
Well, if you want to point me towards a specific...
In the next hour. These frauds often result in a debt owing to the government, a debt owing to the taxpayer. So with respect to the GST, very sophisticated GST carousel schemes, my question would be, what's the highest amount that the government has written off with respect to the GST carousel schemes?
Encore une fois,
Once again, if you want to, if you would like to point me towards a specific case, I will be able to answer. But what I can say about carousels is that we have many measures in place. I can talk about those.
Generally, what's the single largest amount to a corporate taxpayer that the CRA wrote off last year?
je ne peux pas vous parler d'un cas en particulier.
I can't talk about a specific case.
Because of Section 241? Is that correct? So would your position be that your predecessor and the CRA violated Section 241 when in 2019 they said that the highest amount of the amount that they wrote off in 2019 was $133 million? They actually were free to give the amount of the highest amount that a corporate taxpayer has written off. So, Minister, do you still want to rely on Section 241 privacy?
Regardez, je vais me tourner vers le commissaire.
I will turn to the committee.
Could it be 500 million, maybe 600 million? Like what's the amounts we're talking about here?
J'ai le processus sous les yeux, mais...
Well, I have the procedure before me, but I cannot give you the amount. Would you like to respond to that?
Sorry, I want to be very clear about this. Section 241 does not allow you to hide behind giving anonymized details. A previous minister in a previous CRA department released a number that said in 2019, $133 million was written off to one taxpayer. So my question is,
Chambers.
how much was written off to the highest amount in last year?
So first, again, to repeat, I won't be able to answer that question
Okay.
because I don't know.
Okay.
But we are very public with our write-offs in the public accounts.
Okay.
And that's where some numbers, as much as we can reveal, is revealed there. So we can
Thank
go
you.
back and look at those, and maybe I can find the number that you're
Thank you,
looking
Mr.
for.
Hamilton.
And we
Thank
actually
you,
have some
Mr.
officials that may be
Chambers.
able to do that.
Mr. Baines, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the Minister and our officials for joining us today. Minister, in your opening remarks, you talked about the fact that there's an international effort to combat tax fraud. Can you give us some more details about this, please? And like what partnerships are there partnerships internationally that allow you to recollect funds that would have gone abroad?
Merci. Effectivement, on est...
Thank you. We are in different partnerships. We have the International Tax Administrators Forum, the chair of which is the Commissioner. We have the J5, which met in Ottawa about a month ago. And that group brings together public institutions, our counterparts from the 5 member countries, but also financial institutions, so it's public and private. We have the International Fiscal Convention Network, through which we can exchange specific information on specific files with multinationals, for instance. There's the International Bank Transfers Organization. We are exchanging information with around 100 countries in that group. And we also have many other tools at our disposal within Canada. So we're very active on the international scene to exchange information and to be able to trace people who are taking part in fiscal evasion.
Recollect the funds that have gone abroad that are fraudulently or lost.
Ben, on a des ententes avec certains.
We have agreements with some countries which allow us to share the information on such cases. Well, to what extent we're able to recover the funds, I don't have a concrete example. I don't know if the Commissioner can continue answering the question.
And we would have mechanisms in place, not just to share information, but if we have a dispute that arises about money that should have been paid in one jurisdiction and wasn't, or in another jurisdiction, we have methods of trying to resolve those, and we work very closely with other countries to have those mutual
And we're
agreement
successful in those?
procedures
Like
to
we have
resolve
successfully, so we have successfully recovered funds? Has that happened?
Ben, j'ai un exemple sous les yeux. Dans le cas des Panama.
Well, I have an example here. In the Panama Papers case, we were able to recover $83 million.
Okay, and maybe I want to just go back to what my colleague across the way was talking about. CRA, there's fraudsters pretending to be CRA agents, and it's difficult for CRA agents to ensure they're interacting with the right person, but similarly, it's difficult for taxpayers to ensure they're really in touch with the CRA agent. So, like, what are the best practices that you're recommending to taxpayers with respect to that? And should they always be those initiating the calls using a number on your website, or what is the mechanism in place for that?
Effectivement, il faut être très.
Indeed, people need to be very, very careful not to convey information if an agent of the agency calls them, because the agent will already have that information. They wouldn't be asking you for the information. And in case of doubt, whether a communication is from the agency, whether it's in writing or orally, people can always terminate that communication and call the general line of the agency. When you receive an email, there's usually a code as well. So if you call the agency with the code, and if the code doesn't match up to anything, then it's a case of fraud. But if it's the correct code, then in your communication with the agency, you can access your account. So someone calling you from the agency, they will give you information. They will not ask you for information.
Okay, what happens to taxpayers who are victims of identity theft? Are there measures to support them?
Oui, on travaille entre autres avec.
We work with TransUnion when there is a case of identity theft. It's similar to Equifax. People might be familiar with that organization. So it allows people to keep an eye on their accounts if they've had an identity theft case. It again depends on the level of the breach on the account. If the scammer has been able to change a bit of information, for instance, the banking information, to receive the benefit payments without having access to the identity or other information of the taxpayer, that might be one case. In other cases, maybe the scammer has had access to everything. It's rare, but it can happen. So it depends on the level of penetration, and there's a matching level of support that is made available to protect people.
Thank you. I have a question, Madam Minister. There were 31,468 privacy breaches between March 20th and December 22nd, or December 2023, which directly affected 62,000 Canadian taxpayers. Only 113 of those privacy breaches were reported to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and yet 31,468 were reported retroactively. Why weren't those numbers known at the time that only 113 were given to the Privacy Commissioner? Why wasn't he able to access that information?
Donc, c'est vrai qu'il y a eu un.
Well, it's true that there was a bit of a time elapsed between those two, but this information was available in the AG's report, and the delay is explained by the extraordinary increase in identity theft situations. And what was done was block the accounts, contact the individual, just to make sure that if it was indeed a case of identity theft, because sometimes you are concerned that that might be the case, but it's the person themselves who has modified some information. So we have to validate, and that's our priority. And since the number was extraordinarily high, the team was focused on protecting and then following up. And then every single time there is a situation, we rush to understand what has happened and to fill in the gaps, as it were. So given the extremely high number, that is what explains the delay in reporting. But we report every trimester, and we appear here at the Public Accounts Committee, Finance Committee, so we always want to make that information available. But it was clear that there was a significant wave of such cases and that there was a delay because our priority was to protect people.
We're able to break down, like, and I'm not asking because I'm asking for the information. I just want to know, do we know of these 31,000 people who had their privacy affected? Do we know who they are, and have they been contacted individually or not?
Absolument.
Okay.
Absolument.
Absolutely. That is the first thing we do, block their account and call the individual. Thank you, Minister.